I'm really excited to be here today to talk about trust building. It's such an important concept. And before we dive in, I would love to just give our panelists a moment to introduce themselves, share a little bit about them and their work, and then we can dig into the questions. So, Dr. Stephanie Creary, I'll hand it to you first to do a quick intro.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Stephanie Creary. I'm Assistant Professor of Management at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Delighted to be here for you. It has been probably almost, I think it's 18 years, so almost 2 decades that I've been studying corporate diversity, equity, inclusion practices in organizations, both as an applied researcher. So most of my research at the time, in my early days, was going straight into the hands of chief diversity officers and HR people teams. I'm now an academic who publishes research not only for academic research in our journals, but also continues to work with organizations applying some of these insights to the context. So glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Alex, I'll hand it to you for an intro.
Thank you. My name is Alex Tiant. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a director at Paradigm. For anyone who's not familiar, we are a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy firm that helps organizations build more inclusive workplaces, leveraging research like Dr. Stephanie Creary's work and her colleagues' work have helped us with. And in our partnership with organizations around the world, we help them build strategies, we facilitate workshops, and help them overall build inclusive workplaces through several different platforms and services. So really excited to be here today and share some of those experiences our clients have.
Thank you. And Rachel, would love to hear from you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Spivey. I am a director of our team at Google called Stay and Thrive, where we help employees who want to be able to stay and thrive at the company. And then it's mainly focused on retention and progression. So I look forward to telling you more about our program.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here. And I really want to kick us off by grounding ourselves in what trust means. So, Stephanie, I'm going to start with you, and I'd love for you to kick us off by telling us what trust means from an academic perspective and its history and connection to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, so the history of academic research on trust has mostly focused on this psychological state or experience that occurs between people and groups, right? So it's very much at the level of the person. And so that research it goes back to the 1960s, and it's actually the field of psychology, economics, sociology, were some of the first fields to take on the study of trust. And then in the last 25 years, my field, which is organizational behavior, has applied this particularly to trust in the workplace. And so if we're looking at trust between people, right? So I trust you, or you trust me, or maybe we don't. What we're really trying to understand is the willingness that I might have to accept being vulnerable to you, or to take on risk that might come into play when you are either expecting something of me or whether you're doing something that affects me. So it's really about the willingness to accept vulnerability or risk based on someone else's expectations or actions. However, trust doesn't just come into play between people. We can also trust things we can't see, like an institution, right? Like our employer. Like, yes, we see our manager. Yes, we see the senior leaders. The way that we think about trust in that way really comes down to like that definition I just offered as trust in people. But I'm an academic advisor to the Edelman Trust Institute. And so I invite you to look at all the work that they've done, Edelman, EDELMAN.com. As soon as you go to the homepage, you're going to see the Edelman Trust Barometer. They've really done a lot of work in consultation with academics to move trust from the level of just trust between people to trust in institutions. And a lot of what they've studied is like for 20 some odd years is trust in the media, trust in government, trust in businesses, trust in NGOs. And more recently, in the last couple of years, they've looked at trust in a variety of ways in the workplace. And so they acknowledge that, there is something to be said about not just do I trust my manager? Does my manager trust me? But do I trust my employer, this brand? Do I trust the government? So there's some interesting research there. A couple of things that I just want to say just to provide some context is the reason why this is an important concept to study and certainly relevant to the field of diversity, equity, inclusion is because trust really is about relationships, whether it's the relationship between people or the relationship between you and your employer, you and the government, or you and some other thing that we really can't see, but we know it exists out there. Because trust is essential for helping us initiate, maintain, repair, and just overall elevate the relationships we have at work. And so if you think of it as a relational concept that really is about how do you, like, our willingness to be vulnerable to our employer, our willingness to be vulnerable to our manager, our willingness to be vulnerable to the DEI leader who's asking us. I really appreciate what Rupert had to say as far as gaining buy-in. That's so much about trust, right? The last thing I want to say is really tied to what Rupert is saying is understanding that the roles that anybody who is a DEI leader, no matter what your title is, you're playing the role of a change agent. And there's decades of research on what it means to lead change outside of DEI. And so if we just step back into the place of leading change, historically, change agents in organizations were insiders who had been around for a long time. And so there was already some base implicit level of trust because they were people who maybe were respected in other areas of the organization, but now they had to lead this change thing that nobody wanted and was freaked out about. But it's always hard, right? But now what we have is in most organizations, the DEI lead is someone who was an outsider, who just got hired, who's coming into an organization with no baseline of trust from anybody and is trying to lead a massive initiative. And what becomes really important in there in building trust is to help first people who are there overcome the experience of psychological threat when you show up, right? And the threat when you show up is threat to their status, right? I was here first, or we were doing this and we were fine, and now this person's coming in and tell me what we have to do, or threat to their values. And so all this talk around hiring unqualified people is because people have like this perverse sense of what merit means. And so when they think about hard work and earning it, they're thinking that everybody who shows up actually earned it relative to people who they feel like we're forcing in. So these values around merit that they have, these very black and white understandings of merit, feel threatened by these individuals just by you showing up. And certainly how they think about what fairness and equality means is very different from perhaps you think about it. And so those are the threats that are experienced, which makes trust very hard in the DEI context. And so I just hope that that's like enough information to kick us off, but I'm excited to hear what the other panelists have to say to dive in more. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's so helpful as a grounding, and it's sparking for me that, I was recently reading Culture Amp, which I'm sure a lot of organizations are familiar with in terms of engaging their surveys. They recently released research saying that trust in general is down across a lot of things: trust in the executive team, across the industry, trust in the business, trust in government. And so it's such an interesting challenge for DEI practitioners to step into this space, as you say, and be up against kind of that threat of someone new, and also knowing that industry-wide at this time, trust is decreasing versus rising. So thank you so much for that context. I would love to talk about what it means to you to create a culture of trust at work. And Rachel, I'd love for you to kick us off in talking about what that means at Google in particular.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off just giving an overview of my team because it's a little bit different. So then we can ground in some of the information that we found based on that. So my team, the Stay and Thrive team, we focus on making sure that retention and progression is forefront for all employees. And so at any moment, a Googler, that's what we call our Google employees. I'm going to say it a lot. I've been at the company for almost 15 years. So it's second nature to me. So Googlers can come and request support from my team at any time. They can fill out a form, and anytime that they have a question about their career, it could be that they want to improve something, a relationship with their manager. They might just have a question about what progression looks like. From that point, we work with that Googler until resolution. So we have an intake conversation with them to understand why they're coming to us. It could be good, bad, in the middle. They're still figuring things out. And then we work with them on average for about 100 days until they reach their desired outcome, which was stated at the intake conversation. Right now, we're sitting at about a 92% retention rate, which lets us know it's working. Usually our average is around 86%. So we're a little higher right now because of some of the external climate. But just wanted to give you that grounding context. And I love what Dr. Creary said about trust in relationships. And one of the common themes that come up about why Googlers request support from my team is their manager relationships. And so we dived into what does that mean? It would come up so frequently. And when we looked at it, we did a qualitative analysis of all the Googlers who had come to us and said it was their manager relationship. And we saw it was a couple of things. So one, and the number one thing was that their manager could not help them progress their career. The other was that managers didn't for themselves have enough knowledge to help the Googler themselves grow and advance. And the other was interpersonal relationships. And so those are some of the dynamics that we see happening around trust in our organization. And the good news is a lot of that can be fixed and addressed. And so I know we'll probably get to solutions later on, but those are some of the things that we've seen from our time working with Googlers. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because you're touching on this relationship between trust and performance, which I think is key. It's critical. Alex, I'm curious to hear from you because your organization is helping leaders do this for their organization. So I guess my question to you is, why should leaders care beyond just the performance, and what risk does it present to teams and leaders when they don't have trust?
Yeah. So first, when I'll start with the second part of your question, when people don't have trust, it leads to people questioning their belonging. It leads to people not feeling safe to ask for help, ask questions. It also can lead to people just being held back, not taking risks or trying challenging new tasks. If they feel as if their manager or the organization doesn't trust them to take those risks, to use their expertise and knowledge to expand in the work they're doing. And that can hold not only the individual back, but the organization back. If people aren't feeling safe to talk about their mistakes together with their teams, that can lead to people not learning from each other and people repeating the same mistakes that their colleagues had made. And there's a lot of different challenges that can come into place in general with feedback too. So I definitely want to focus on that as well. When organizations have leaders that are more in kind of a fixed mindset, tend to think that the nature of talents and abilities are fixed at birth rather than a growth mindset, believing that people can change with effort and coaching. It can lead to that having a more of a growth mindset can lead to people feeling like they have that safety to ask those questions, to be willing to ask for feedback about a specific thing they worked on, not trying to hide the things they did that maybe weren't as good. So you want to have leaders in organizations that have more of that growth mindset because it impacts the people that they're reporting to. When you're on a team where somebody, makes it seem like, well, you just can't do that, so I'm just going to take over, you're probably not going to want to go to them to set some new goals. You're probably going to set easier goals and not loftier goals. So all of those things can really have a huge impact on the organization as a whole and individuals specifically. And I think it's important, especially in this space, to mention that people from marginalized or stereotype groups, that's even more high end. If you're on a team that's diverse and you're a leader, it is especially critical that you're thinking about how are you giving feedback? How are you cultivating that trust for your teams? Are you creating that psychological safety and modeling some of that humility? Like Dr. Curry mentioned, you want to make sure you're on teams with leaders that are able to say, hey, this is an area I'm trying to learn. I would love for you to give me feedback. Or when I was at your level, this was a challenge I had, and providing those interventions to make sure people recognize that it doesn't take, it's not so simple to get from point A to point B. You need to have that coaching and experience, and people should be there to guide you along the way. So those are some of the things that we're seeing help leaders especially grow in building that trust on their teams, is having that open conversation, sharing their learnings, and making others feel safe to do the same.
Yeah, I love that. And you're touching on, we're talking a little bit about buy-in. The conversation started in a place of getting stakeholder buy-in. And I think so often when you talk about concepts like trust, like psychological safety, like inclusion, for leaders who don't have the buy-in, it can really feel like a soft science. So I'm curious to hear from you all. What is the data behind it? What is the hard science there? And also, what are some really tangible, you talked a little bit, Alex, about some tangible things leaders can do to create that trust by modeling vulnerability. But I'm really curious to hear some other ideas for what managers can practically do, can tangibly do, and how to really present the hard data there. So Stephanie, I don't know if you have anything that you would want to speak to.
There's actually one point that I want to make. We're actually using really great concepts. This is why you have the academic on the call, right?
Yeah.
We're using the term psychological safety and trust. And so I feel the need to help us understand the differences between these two terms. They're really related, and both of these are really key concepts as you think about your toolkit of DEI terms that you're trying to use that I think are accessible. So Amy Edmondson, who is most known for the work on psychological safety, she wrote a paper about 20 years ago that was really all about differentiating psychological safety and trust. And I'm just going to read part of that aloud for us because I think it's very accessible. And so she says, as noted, the concepts of psychological safety and trust have much in common. They both describe psychological states involving perceptions of risk or vulnerability, as well as making choices to minimize negative consequences. However, when we're thinking about trust, we're thinking about giving others the benefit of the doubt with a focus on others' potential outcome, actions, or trustworthiness. So the fact that it's like trusting someone else, there's like the other. And when we're talking about psychological safety, we're focusing on ourselves, right? Is whether we feel like we will be given the benefit of the doubt when we make a mistake. And so it's like important, right? Because these are complementary concepts. Is like, do I trust them? And then you think about psychological safety is, will they give me the benefit of the doubt if I make a mistake? So I just wanted to put those out there as I'm thinking about, one of the things that we're often accused of as people who care about DEI is creating new terms and just like throwing like the word salad. So as we're talking about trust today, I just want to give us more rigor on how we can think about incorporating this term if it makes sense. So your question was also about like things that can be done in order to, my understanding of the question was about things that can be done in order to increase trust in the workplace. All right. So if we're thinking about trust as feeling like I can trust my manager, like what should be done so that I trust my manager more? Well, part of that is like, what is the manager actually doing to gain my trust, right? And I would say that, without a doubt, when I talk to, whether it's people who participate in my research studies or whether it's companies that I work with, the reason why people often don't trust their managers is because they don't feel like their manager actually cares about them as a person. Just doesn't care about them as a person. And I think most of this is about the people managers, right? And if you think about what it means to be a people manager, you're like somebody's having to do a lot of work. You're getting a lot of pressure from underneath you, from your direct reports, and you're getting a lot of pressure from your managers. And so most people managers will tell you, I don't have time for anything. They don't have time for this. They don't have time for that. They don't have time for DEI. They don't have time for performance reviews. And so people managers feel very stressed and pressed for time to do anything, particularly things that relate to how do I make my employees feel like they can trust me. But actually, when I think about, some of my youngest students and the youngest people in my data set, it's actually really simple answer to how you gain trust from people who are from the younger generations. And that is ask them about who they are as people and what do they enjoy, right? And it's this idea that I can trust my manager because I feel like my manager knows inherently who I am as a person and what makes me tick outside of this job. That's just an example of, for that particular generation, what seems to be increasingly important in helping them to feel that they can trust their manager. And the last thing that I'm going to say is the reason why that's important is because managers often are very perplexed why younger people don't like their feedback. And it's because they don't trust the feedback that they are given because they don't trust the source of the feedback. So to solve that problem around do people internalize the feedback that they're given? Do they accept it? It really does require building trust between the person who is the recipient of the feedback and the person who's providing the feedback. And like I said, for the younger generation, that's about, do I feel like you care about me or understand who I am as a person? Thanks.
Yeah, So powerful. And something that you said I think resonated with a lot of us is that people managers, they're always going to feel like they don't have enough time. That's probably constant across all of our organizations. And what I'm always trying to reinforce with managers is there are parts of processes that you can trim down for efficiencies that should be quick, that should be nimble. And then there are things that we intentionally slow down and invest in because we know long term the impact of that is greater than you saving 5% of your time today on this Monday, whatever day of the month it is. So I really love that perspective on you want somebody to perform at their best, to show up and be their fullest, most productive self, to be receptive to the feedback you are giving them. If you're not investing in that trust and that relationship building upfront, none of it matters. You can give the clearest feedback. If the trust isn't there, people won't take it. So I love that.
Just one quick follow-up. A quick example of this was I was doing an executive ed workshop yesterday on actually relationships and sponsorship in the workplace with a bunch of senior leaders. And this one gives it this one man, says, yeah, I'm a white man and I have like a female direct report. And I did a lot of work to try to make sure that I was giving like unbiased feedback, and I thought I did a good job. And all the signals that she gave me was that I did a good job giving her this feedback. And then after the fact, I hear from other people that she didn't like this feedback at all. So he goes to his female friend at work, who's also at his level, and says, "Could you please look at this feedback, debrief this with me? What I do wrong?" And she goes, "Well, that feels kind of right. Do you mind me following up with that person?" So then this woman, the leader, follows up with the junior person, gives the same feedback, and everything goes fine. The content wasn't different. The person delivering it was different. And so we talked a lot about how that's a real thing, is people are more inclined to trust someone who is similar to them than is not. And so then what would it take for that male leader to gain the trust of the junior woman, knowing that it's not going to feel as easy or as automatic with the senior female woman?
Thank you for that example. Rachel, this is like your bread and butter because you're talking about that thrive, the grow, the develop, and the people manager really being the opportunity area there. I'm curious for your perspective on this. Like, what tangibly do you tell those managers when you're experiencing their reports saying, I don't trust, I don't feel like my manager is giving me the feedback I need or the growth I need?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Well, one of the things we realized when we actually triage and we get in the middle of these manager relationships. So first time I talked about like when we do some like back end research to see why people are coming to us. But when we actually get involved and try and triage and support those manager relationships, the number one thing that we see and that can be fixed is miscommunication, right? So usually it's like the manager, similar to Stephanie's example, the manager thought he was giving feedback in a certain way. The person received it in a different way. There's usually some type of miscommunication that's rooted at it. And I'm so glad Stephanie went back and defined psychological safety for us, just because that was that opportunity to give the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's one of the biggest things is that you can continue to build that trust when you give the benefit of the doubt, knowing that there probably will be a miscommunication. There will be something that might go awry, but if you give that benefit of the doubt, or if that employee feels like you are going to give them the benefit of the doubt, it can help you work through it quicker. And then we actually do see a lot of transparency issues. So we talked about progression, and progression is the number one reason why people leave Google. Any person leaves Google over years, and it's like you can look at a longitudinal study. Progression is the number one. Even it's so clear that in our employee survey, more than it's better predictor than if someone's going to leave, even more than them saying, I plan to be at this company 5 years from now, is I feel like my career goals can be met at this company. And what's so important about that is actually like promotion and progression transparency. So a lot of times managers don't understand it for themselves, which we see a lot. If they're a new manager, they might come to Google, and even though they're in a manager position, it doesn't mean that they know what it takes to get promoted at Google. So it takes time for that manager to understand the process and then be able to translate it to that their report. And particularly, even if there are no opportunities for promotion or progression, they need to state that clearly. And that goes into that transparency, that trust of like, I know that this manager is going to tell me the truth, even if it's something I don't want to necessarily hear.
Yeah, it's such a great point, and it's a great segue. Someone earlier in the chat said that one of the barriers they face to establishing trust is a conflict between the employer's priorities and the employees. And it makes me want to ask the question, and Alex, I'll start with you on this. Is trust the same as agreement? Can you have trust when there's disagreement or a misalignment of, yes, you're ready to get promoted, or no, we're not going to action on the feedback that you're giving us at this time?
Yeah, trust is definitely not the same as agreement. And I think one of the challenges, especially people in middle management face, because not only are they, having to make sure that they're building that trust with their reports, but also upward as well, is that you can't always communicate the things as transparently as you would like to. And that transparency is one of the things that does help build trust. So, what I find when I'm working with my clients is that if there is a manager or a leader who's having a challenge where they want to be able to communicate something effectively and build the trust on their teams, but they know that people aren't going to like the answer, I find that it's more helpful for them to talk through their thought process, make sure people are aware of all of the things they considered, make sure they're asking people for their feedback and their ideas and letting them know why or why not they are taking their ideas. Saying yes or no is not necessarily the only way to build trust with people. You need to make sure you're explaining yourself, explaining your thought process. If people don't understand how your decisions are made, they're less likely to trust your decisions. So that transparency in how you make decisions, even if you can't give all the details, can help build the trust. And even when it does lead to disagreement, you want to make sure you're encouraging people to continue sharing their feedback, continue sharing their perspectives and what would be ideal for them. So you can use that to inform maybe future decisions where their ideas are relevant.
I love that. I'm so glad that Stephanie, you brought up Amy Edmondson, because I was fortunate enough to go to a class she taught on leading during uncertainty. And Alex, a lot of what she said touches on some of the things that you're bringing up. This idea that, as a leader, you might not have the exact skill or expertise that somebody on your team might have. You might disagree, you might go in another direction. But really, what makes a really strong leader, even in these moments of disagreement and uncertainty, is the ability to, one, like, be as candor and transparent as possible, to remain present and accessible, to give people the why, the context, and then show up in the ways that you can give people the resources they need to really flourish. So I love everything that you called out there. We talked a lot about how we can have leaders gain the trust of their teams. But I'm curious to hear from you all on how can we teach leaders to trust their teams. And I'm curious, just for any of you, whoever has a thought on this, I'd love to hear kind of your reaction and your response to that.
So I first start, when we say leaders, I have to differentiate this between the people managers, the people in the middle, and the people who are senior, because I see these as different opportunities. And so I'm going to focus on the middle because so much of my research focuses on the middle. And I would say I see this more pronounced, an issue of trusting people below with middle managers. And so this reminds me of a conversation. So I teach diversity courses that I created when I came to Wharton in 2017. And so we just started the semester or the quarter on Monday. So I'm 2 classes in. And it's interesting because I think part of the problem that these, budding people managers, or actually people managers, have is that they trust in themselves more so than they trust in other people, because their entire lives they've been rewarded for their individual contributions. They know they got an A. They know that they did whatever things that they feel like they did to be successful. So they trust in their own skills and competencies. And no one ever made them sort of think about this idea that part of what their role is as managers is to develop other people, right? And so part of, I think, so we talk about micromanagers. So part of the challenge of like less experienced, more novice, or, just somebody who's really control oriented as a manager is like the inability to delegate because they don't trust that anybody else can do as good of a job as they do. How that then elaborates to the DEI context more broadly is if a manager's responsibility is to help develop the careers of their junior reports, that has to mean to them that sticking their neck out there and vouching for someone and advocating for someone isn't going to cause them harm. And people who are people managers, research shows time and time again, they're so concerned about self and what does this mean to me and my own self-protection that they don't delegate and let go of work and allow people to develop their skills and competencies, and they don't develop people's careers in the way that they should because they're afraid if they stick their necks out there that it'll fall back on them. So the opportunity then for a lot of people managers is to help them understand how do you move from holding everything close and tight to your heart to little by little trusting in your employees that they can do some of the work, right? And that's a whole training I won't get into, but I think that's the opportunity.
I would love to add on that. One of the common things I see is when managers specifically are trying to help build that trust on their teams and they aren't sure, because it's different working styles or people have different learning styles. It is really important if you are a people manager to find out how your team likes to collaborate, how your team likes to work. And even if their approach is different from the way it used to be done or the way you've been doing it forever, having that trust in them that their approach can still get to the solution, and giving people the option to learn, letting them know your expectations up front so they can find their best way to get to that finish line. And I think that open communication will make delegation way easier for managers that are struggling with it.
Yeah. Psych safety too, establishing trust, establishing psychological safety, both of those things, which are separate but both important. It's hard. It's really hard. And psychological safety is a sliding scale, meaning that things happening in the world, things happening internally, you get a new team member, you get a new manager, all of these things kind of move you up and down the progress bar when it comes to psychological safety. And there's an X and Y axis of respect and autonomy, right? Like the more respect and the more autonomy you can give team members, the higher the level of psychological safety is. So some of what you're talking about, Stephanie, this idea of being able to let go a bit, it is investing in a relationship of psychological safety because one, you're respecting and recognizing that people bring their own skills and expertise to the table, and you're kind of giving them the autonomy to try things within, a certain parameter where they are safe to learn and contribute and make mistakes and sometimes fail. And again, people managers, time is a limited resource. So some managers won't take the time to invest in that, moving things up that axis, but it's so important.
And to trust that your team members' contributions can make the idea better.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, you are smart. Yes, you are smart. You are a great, technician or whatever you do, right? You've been a great engineer your entire life, right? The reality is you don't need to have it doesn't need to be 100% you in order for it to be good. It's actually going to be better because other people get to say stuff about it, right? That's like a core opportunity for most in tech. I think that there was something in like, what are the differences in trust in tech or the implications of this in tech? In tech, you got a lot of people who are, very good, skilled technical experts. They're not people managers. They get thrown into a managerial role because somebody needs to manage people, but they've had no leadership training, right? But they're very good at like creating the video games or creating the product or creating the code, right? And they trust their ability to get that right. And so, creating opportunities for them to understand, like, what does it mean if somebody else weighs in? Like, that's like a good thing, or that can be a good thing, is how can I still feel like the creative process is important when other people give ideas, right?
Yeah.
One more thing I'll just add is that a lot of times we hear from managers that they're under their own pressure. They might not trust feel like they can trust their own leadership. And again, to Stephanie's point, either they might be new in management and they just are not skilled at being a manager, or they are under immense pressure from their own leadership. And so sometimes that's why they have a hard time trusting their own teams, is because they themselves do not feel psychologically safe in their own jobs. And I think we take that for granted a lot of times. And this not trusting their team members is a response of them and the pressure that they're already receiving.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Okay, I want to ask you all just one more question before we move into a little bit of an audience Q&A. And I would love if each of you could sort of give us, if you want people to take away one thing that they can take back to their organizations or their companies or wherever they're working and making change, making an impact, what would that one thing be?
I think around the topic of trust, I think I want to take this from the standpoint of the people who are on this call, and a variety of people who are on this call are in the role of trying to create more inclusive environments, whatever your title is I think it's important that we say things like, I want to earn your trust, right? I'm here to help gain your trust. And I think people appreciate that when we say those words, because you're putting it out there in a way that's an offering, that's saying that, I'm going to continue to do what it takes to earn your trust so that, we can effectively build this environment that we all want, right? For me, that's really important, is acknowledging to someone else that that's the thing that you feel like is essential for you all working effectively together, and is really an opportunity that is, I don't want to say in the way, but is in the space between the ideas that you have and the execution of them.
I'll add, modeling humility for your teams, making sure people know where your growth areas were and how you got to the place you're at. That could be a really helpful way to show your humanity and the growth journey you were on, and help them feel motivated, and also help them trust that you are there to help them get there as well.
I'll just add the words plus the action is so critical, because you can say that I'm here for you. I really care about your personal well-being. And I've had so many managers say that. And then like, if I'm sick, it's like, okay, I'm so sorry you're sick. And can you do these things? And then you realize that those words were shallow and they were hollow and they didn't mean anything. And so especially in points of contention and points of stress, when you still are able to show up for that employee and do what you said you were going to do, even in those tough moments, I think that's what I would take away from this conversation, to really build that ultimate level of trust.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for your insights and for being here today. This was such a lovely conversation to moderate, and I feel like I've learned so much from each of you. So just feeling really grateful to be able to be here.